Hey guys, it's Mrs. Mahoney. I'm going to read the next 2 chapters of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. But before I did that, I just wanted to say how proud I am of all of you. First of all, so many of you are doing the principal's challenges each day. But also, I saw your responses for the ways that you have shown love to people around you. And I can't even begin to tell you how full my heart is and how proud I am of all of you. I feel so lucky that I get to work with you and your families each day. And I am so proud of the work that you're doing at home and how well your bubblegum brains have embraced virtual learning. But most importantly, the ways that you're looking and trying to show others love in this very difficult time that we're in. So give yourselves a pat in the back and know that I am so proud of you. All right, so time for some silliness. Let's read Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Chapter 4, Sherry. Sherry had long eyelashes. She weighed only 49 pounds. She always wore a big red and blue overcoat with a hood. The overcoat weighed 35 pounds. The red part weighed 15 pounds, the blue part weighed 15 pounds, and the hood weighed 5 pounds. Her eyelashes weighed 1.5 pounds. She sat next to the window in Mrs. Jules' class. She spent a lot of time just staring out the window. Mrs. Jules didn't mind. Mrs. Jules said that a lot of people learn best when they stare out a window. Sherry often fell asleep in class. Mrs. Jules didn't mind that either. She said that a lot of people do their best learning when they are asleep. Sherry spent all of her time either looking out the window or sleeping. Mrs. Jules thought that she was the best student in the class. One afternoon, it was very hot. All of the windows were open, yet Sherry still wore her red and blue overcoat. The heat made her very tired. Mrs. Jules was teaching arithmetic. Sherry pulled the hood up over her face, buried herself in the coat, and went to sleep. Mrs. Jules, said Kathy, Sherry is asleep. That's good, said Mrs. Jules. She must be learning something. Mrs. Jules continued with the lesson. Sherry began to snore. Mrs. Jules, Sherry is snoring, said Kathy. Yes, I can hear, said Mrs. Jules. She must be learning an awful lot today. I wish the rest of you were just like her. Sherry began to toss and turn. She flopped over on top of her desk and then rolled over on top of Kathy's desk. Then she rolled back the other way. Kathy screamed. Sherry rolled out the window. She was still sound asleep. As you know, Mrs. Jules' class was on the 30th story of Wayside School, so Sherry had a long way to go. After she had fallen 10 stories, Sherry woke up. She looked around. She was confused. She wasn't in Mrs. Jules' class anymore, and she wasn't at home in bed. She couldn't figure out where she was, so she yawned, pulled the hood back over her eyes, and went back to sleep. By that time, she had fallen another 10 stories. Wayside School had an exceptionally large playground. Lewis, the yard teacher, was way over on the other side of it when he happened to see Sherry fall out the window. He ducked under the volleyball net, hurtled past the kickball field, hopped over the hopscotch course, climbed through the monkey bars, sped across the grass, and caught Sherry just before she hit the ground. The people in Mrs. Jules' class cheered. Sherry woke up in Lewis's arms. Lewis, what did you go and wake me up for? She asked. I'm sorry, Sherry, said Lewis. I'm sorry, Sherry repeated. Is that all you can say? I was having a wonderful dream when you woke me up. You're always bothering me, Lewis. I can't stand it. She laughed and hugged him around the neck. Lewis carried her back up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' room. That evening, when Sherry went to bed, she was unable to fall asleep. She just wasn't tired. Chapter 5, Todd. All of the children in Mrs. Jules' class, except Todd, were talking and carrying on. Todd was thinking. Todd always thought before he spoke. When Todd got an idea, his eyes lit up. Todd finished thinking and began to speak. But before he said 2 words, Mrs. Jules called him. Todd, she said, you know better than to talk in class. You must learn to work quietly, like the other children. She wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd looked around in amazement. All of the other children who had been talking and screaming and fighting only seconds earlier were working quietly in their workbooks. Todd scratched his head. A child was given 3 chances in Mrs. Jules' class. The first time he did something wrong, Mrs. Jules wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. The second time he did something wrong, she would put a check next to his name. And the third time he did something wrong, she circled his name. Todd reached into his desk and pulled out his workbook. He had only just started on it when he felt someone tap him on the shoulder. It was Joy. "What page are you on?" Joy asked. "Page 4, Todd whispered. "I'm on page 11, said Joy. Todd didn't say anything. He didn't want to get in trouble. He just went back to work. 5 minutes later, Joy tapped him again. Todd ignored her. So Joy poked him in the back with her pencil. Todd pretended he didn't notice. Joy got up from her seat and sharpened her pencil. She came back and poked it in Todd's back. "What page are you on?" she asked. "Page 5, Todd answered. "Boy, are you slow," said Joy. "I'm on page 29. "It isn't a race," Todd whispered. 5 minutes later, Joy pulled Todd's hair and didn't let go until he turned around. "What page are you on?" she demanded. "Page 6, Todd answered as quietly as he could. "I'm on page 200, Joy shouted. Todd was very angry. "Will you please let me do my work and stop bothering me?" Mrs. Jules heard him. "Todd, what did I say about talking in class?" Todd scratched his head. Mrs. Jules put a check next to Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd really tried to be good. He knew if he talked one more time, Mrs. Jules would circle his name. Then he'd have to go home early at 12 o'clock on the kindergarten bus, just as he had the day before and the day before that. In fact, there hadn't been a day since Mrs. Jules took over the class that she hadn't sent Todd home early. She said she did it for his own good. The other children went home at 2 o'clock. Todd wasn't really bad. He just always got caught. He really wanted to stay past 12 o'clock. He wanted to find out what the class did from 12 to 2. But it didn't look as though it was going to be his day. It was only 10:30, and he already had 2 strikes against him. He sealed his lips and went back to work. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Jules opened it. 2 men stepped in wearing masks. "Give us all your money," they demanded. "All I have is a nickel," said Mrs. Jules. "I have a dime," said Mauricia. "I have 13 cents, said Leslie. "I have 4 cents, said Damien. "What kind of bank is this?" asked one of the robbers. "It's not a bank, it's a school," said Todd. "Can't you read?" "No," said the robbers. "Neither can I," said Todd. "Do you mean we walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing?" asked the robber. "Don't you have anything valuable?" Todd's eyes lit up. "We sure do," he said. "We have knowledge." He grabbed Joy's workbook and gave it to the robbers. "Knowledge is much more valuable than money." "Thanks, kid," said one of the robbers. "Maybe I'll give up being a criminal and become a scientist," said the other. They left the room without hurting anybody. "Now I don't have a workbook," complained Joy. Mrs. Jules gave her a new one. Joy had to start all the way back at the beginning. "Hey, Joy, what page are you on?" asked Todd. "Page 1, Joy sighed. "I'm on page 8, said Todd triumphantly. Mrs. Jules heard him. She circled his name. Todd had 3 strikes against him. At 12 o'clock, he left the room to go home early on the kindergarten bus. But this time when he left, he was like a star baseball player leaving the field. All the children stood up, clapped their hands, and whistled. Todd scratched his head. Stay tuned for our next Principals Challenge.
Hi, we're Mrs. Mrs. Mahoney's kids. This challenge has 2 parts. The first part is, what do you think your teacher would think if you were sleeping during class? The second part is, why do you think Todd's classmates were cheering for him when he left early? We can't wait to read your responses. Bye!